This is a presentation that I did on July 10, 2010 on the cure. And I talked about how we seek the cure and what we find in healers. I talked about church authority and the role of church authority. And I told some stories about this. And then I talked about a healer who presented ways to heal and how that happened. I talked about a couple of healers. And I talked about other spirits, the importance of understanding other spirits that are happening as we're seeking the cure. It's a complex issue. I talked about Satan's attacks, which are many. My observations about healing. Many of us start a process of healing and recovery to be safe, and many follow God's call to come away from those who cover up or enable wrong and abuse. There are many who reject misrepresentations of the Bible and wrongs that are done in the name of Christ. These wrongs are many. It's a sad history for the, quote, Christian church. Some of us who reject the misrepresentations of the Bible and the wrongs that are done in the name of Christ, we may be at risk of connecting to healers who are motivated by other spirits, even in the name of Christ. Observations with healing. It is not easy to tell which spirit is motivating someone. Satan takes advantage of times when we are wounded and vulnerable. Where can we go to find healing and safety? This presentation talks about what we find in the book of 1 John chapter 4. In presenting this, it is not a biblical analysis of all the words in text. Instead, what is presented is the process of truth. And this is a process of truth that I find for this presentation in looking at the book of 1 John and in chapter 4. So the first principle is that we need to test the cure. 1 John 4 verse 1, we are told to believe not every spirit, but to test the spirits to see if they are of God. Why? Because there are many false prophets, false healers, and false spirits in the world. In testing the cure, we are told to test the spirits, the medicine, and the prayers, even if it comes in the name of Christ. We are to ask, is it from God or from another spirit? In testing the cure in this presentation, we're going to look at 10 biblical principles or warning signs to watch for and observe. And in testing the spirits, it is best to compare these 10 signs and observe the process in the life of the person who we're seeking help from. So in testing the cure, the focus and process of this is on Jesus. And there's a lot more than correct theology or doctrine found here. We need to ask ourselves the question, do they really walk the walk with Him? And this is one of 10 steps. So there's more questions to ask as you watch this presentation information that really helps us, and the Bible has this in 1 John chapter 4. At this point, I'm going to turn to the presentation as it was recorded, because this is when the recording actually started to work.
It involves knowing Jesus personally, and the cure involves having Jesus live inside of us through His Holy Spirit. We become strong. Let's back that up. We become strong because greater is He that is in us than he that is in the world. We need to think about that and let that sink into our heart and our soul. And His power is made perfect in weakness. We are imperfect, and we struggle with many things. But it's because of that, because we're human, because we're imperfect, because of His power, that He shows ourselves through our weakness. I mean, He shows Himself through our weakness. So, an important thing to notice about this principle is that we are not told to become strong through focusing on strength that comes outside of ourselves through imperfect people. Pastors, counselors, spiritual people, leaders, prayer warriors, or healers, they're all important people, but they're all imperfect people. God may and does use these and other people as methods or vehicles through whom He helps us to know and become strong in Him. And I thank God for those people in my life. And I can't count how many have been used by God to help me, because it took a long time for God to get through my thick head and get me to really hear this about His love. The Bible teaches balance in that it also teaches that in the multitude of counselors, there's safety. And I like that about the Bible. It teaches balance. It doesn't teach an extreme on one side or the other. So we each need to become strong inside of us because Jesus lives in us, and nothing else can replace our personal experience and our knowledge and our walk with Him. Nothing else can substitute for the strength that we find in Jesus. And those who have the Spirit of Jesus and also have gifts of healing will lift up Jesus. So the cure should lift up the source of strength that's found in a personal walk with God. And these concepts that I'm presenting today, I don't know how many of you realize this, but when you read the Bible and you study history, these concepts are core foundational beliefs that were found in the New Testament with Pentecost, in the New Testament church, and also in the founding of Protestantism. So the third principle for the cure and testing of spirits is the Spirit of truth. 1 John 4, verse 6, those who know God hear Him. And it is by personally knowing Him, hearing God, that we become able to discern the spirit of truth and the spirit of error. And another version of the Bible calls it the spirit of deception. To discern whether a spirit or a way of healing or cure is from God, we must learn to hear God's voice. And this takes time. These texts do not say that we must hear God's voice only through a pastor or a counselor or a prayer warrior. Like I said, they are methods. All of those people are methods, but we are to learn to hear Him ourselves. And I'm grateful that God has used many of these people to help me connect with and trust God, learn about Him. So this text also says that we must learn to know and hear God for ourselves. I have to come over here because I can't read it very well back there. And this is a safeguard against spirits, cures, or ways of healing that are not from God. And this takes time in our devotional life. So my thought is, because this is very important, maybe that's why God led Oasis to start the Discerning God's Voice class. Test number 4. I only have one slide on this, but this is deeper than I can present today. Knowing God equals love. Think about it. 1 John 4, 7, and 8. If love is from God, and those who love know God, for God is love. That's really deep. I can't even quite grasp that. So we cannot know God without also becoming a person who loves. It's an awesome promise. Test number 5. Love to God equals love to others. So we have to interact with each other in our spiritual journey. And we need relationships with others who follow Jesus, and none of us is intended to be alone or an island. This is one I've struggled with because I've tended to stay away from the body of Christ because of wounds. We are to learn to love by having a personal experience with God, and that's important. But we're also to learn to love by having a love relationship with others in the community and body of Christ. It's just in the passage between that and the next. Yeah. Thank you. So when we are loved by others, the result is that we learn to love God and we learn to know His will. And for myself, there were problems and addictions that I had that were destructive in my life, and I had no conscience about those things. I didn't think they were wrong until I had a relationship with other people who were following Him and following Him in recovery, and I could see through their eyes how they felt about it, and I began to get a conscience about it. I began to realize, this isn't what God wants in